love God first, and then love our neighbour as ourselves. Fairly easy to talk about, hard to do.
You've joined us for Mission 66, bringing the Bible to life, book by book and chapter by chapter. This program is brought to you by TWR in partnership with the Bible teaching ministry of Dr. Luis Sayao. We're currently in the book of Leviticus. You can follow along with your downloadable study guide at mission66.org. Now, here's Esther to get us started.
Welcome to our daily look into the Bible, where today we journey through the third book of the Bible, Leviticus. Now, we'll be studying two chapters, chapters 17 and 19, which are out of sequence, but you'll see why we are grouping them together in just a moment. Well, ethics, honesty, and virtue are all good goals to strive for. Yet most of it is just common sense. Well, our teacher, John Mathews, will present the theme, Your Neighbor as Yourself.
Esther, thank you so much, and a very warm welcome to Mission 66. Wherever you join us from today, whatever your situation, it is so good to be with you as we continue in the book of Leviticus, which is emphasizing and continues to emphasize the importance of holiness before God. From chapter 17 on all the way to chapter 20, there's a lot of talk about rules, regulations, and certain guidelines having to do with several themes guiding the Israelites on how to live in a way that honored God. Now, chapter 17 emphasizes specifically the prohibition to eat blood. From verse 10 on, it says, I will set my face against any Israelite or any foreigner residing among them who eats blood, and I will cut them off from the people, for the life of a creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you to make atonement for yourselves on the altar. It is the blood that makes atonement for one's life. Therefore I say to the Israelites, none of you may eat blood, nor may any foreigner residing among you eat blood. So the rule was known, and it was clearly emphasized that every Israelite was forbidden to eat blood. The animal would have to have its blood poured on the earth, and then it was buried because the life was the blood. This was the law, and it was concerned with holiness. Now, in the next episode, for important reasons, we'll be talking about chapter 18 and part of chapter 19 that continue to emphasize the holiness of God and the need to be holy. But some of the laws here deserve special attention. Verse 3, for example, says, each of you must respect your mother and father, and you must observe my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols or make metal gods for yourselves. I am the Lord your God. Got several interesting commandments that are all wrapped up and concerned with God's holiness, and they're reflected in ethics, in practical life and human relations. Verse 9 on, we have many commandments that are of a social nature, and they're important and significant. For example, verse 9 says, when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time, or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not deceive one another. Do not swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Do not defraud or rob your neighbor. Do not hold back, and pay attention here to the second part of verse 13. Do not hold back the wages of a hired worker overnight. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind, but fear your God. I am the Lord. Do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. It's interesting to see, isn't it, how many of these commandments show a real concern for those who are considered weaker, less fortunate, those who are really in need, so that they are not exploited or used in an unjust and an unfair way in this society. It goes on to say, do not go about spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. I am the Lord. Do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly, so you will not share in their guilt. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord, says verse 18. Keep my decrees. Do not mate different kinds of animals. Do not plant your field with two kinds of seed. Do not wear clothing woven of two kinds of material. This commandment was concerned with the idea of going after mysticism, some kind of strange mixing or crossing of ideas perhaps that strayed from what God had set as a pattern as how things should be. And verse 20 then says, if a man sleeps with a female slave who is promised to another man, but who has not yet been ransomed or given her freedom, there must be due punishment. Yet they are not to be put to death, because she had not been freed. So the man would then have to present an offering for the sin he had committed. The fruit trees as well should be considered forbidden for the first 3 years. They were to be preserved and set aside for the Lord. Now, this was a holy law that in the end had ecological results clearly for the best. Do not eat any meat, it says, with the blood still in it. Do not practice divination or seek omens. Do not cut the hair at the sides of your head or clip off the edges of your beard. This commandment, probably similar to what we see in verse 19, was for reasons related to paganism. It says, do not cut your bodies for the dead or put tattoo marks on yourselves. Verse 28, do not degrade your daughter by making her a prostitute, or the land will turn to prostitution and be filled with wickedness. Observe my Sabbaths and have reverence for my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Do not turn to mediums or seek out spiritists, for you will be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. Stand up in the presence of the aged. Show respect for the elderly and revere your God. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself. Do not use dishonest standards when measuring length, weight, or quantity. Use honest scales and honest weights, an honest ephah and an honest hin. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. Keep all my decrees and all my laws, and follow them. I am the Lord. As we can see clearly here, this holy God is an ethical God, and holiness before God, ritual holiness in worship, was to be expressed through an entire lifestyle marked by being different, marked by behavior that pleases God, and it's based on this. And I think it's also important to point out that the basis for this law is basically the following that is repeated. I am the Lord your God. The basis for right behavior, correct behavior, for ethics, for the law, cannot be laid at the door of society itself, because society changes all the time and has different ideas and motivations and even morals as time passes. And the basis, well, it can't be us, the human being. The transcendent basis of the world has to be God himself. So the rules are clear, are spoken here to these people. You should be reverent and worship the Lord. Keep the Sabbath holy. Don't turn to other idols. You should worship God in the right way. Respect your neighbours, all of those around you. And there's a special word here as well, isn't there? Pointing out that no one should take advantage of those who are under their power, who might be considered subservient or weaker. You should not seek another source of power to resolve your problems. Don't seek out other idols. Don't get involved with witchcraft, with divination, or look to spirits for answers. You should only seek God for everything. And what a guide it is. The law of God is overflowing with wisdom and actually with freedom when he is placed on the throne of our lives. And the law of God provides us with crucial guidance, the only guidance we need. And in this chapter we have many words of wisdom in this law that reaches out across time, that must be observed by us today, not as a law, but as wise principles for living our lives. It's so obvious that many of these commandments are contextual and need to be understood as such, but they still present beneficial principles to our society, respecting life, valuing our neighbours, realising the importance of putting God at the centre of everything, the centrality of God, the respect, the protection of those who are disadvantaged, of those who are in need. All this presents a fundamental social sense of ethics that results in the preservation, even the flourishing of society. So before the wisdom of God, of the law of God, let's not be outlaws, even though that kind of approach certainly comes fairly easily, certainly to me, and many of others I think will resonate with that. But let's not be an outlaw. Let's not go about finding utter bondage in what we think is freedom, wherein real freedom lies here within the safe confines of God's law. Listen to the word that God gives to the Israelites, words of obedience, and let's apply the relevant principles that we find in the Old Testament of the Bible to our lives. And what happens? We will know unknown benefit.
You're listening to Mission 66, and we're with our teacher, John Mathews. Today we're taking two separate chapters, looking at Leviticus 17 and 19, which at times might be a little difficult to understand. So we're grateful for this time in which we can ask John our questions. But hey, friend, do you remember when the Bible was tough for you to understand and somebody came alongside you to help you understand it better? Well, there are thousands of listeners in other countries who rely on Mission 66 for their Bible teaching. But they also need someone to come alongside them financially to keep the sound Bible teaching that you've come to rely upon on the air each day. Well, please take a moment right now to ask the Lord what He would have you give as a thank you offering for using Mission 66 in your life and in the lives of thousands as well. You can simply log on to mission66.org to give your generous gift right now, whether that's a monthly gift or simply one time. Please don't let this opportunity pass you by. Mission 66 is entirely listener supported, and we depend on friends like you to stay on the air. So that's mission66.org to give your generous gift right now. We thank you, friend. Well, let's get right into the questions, John. Now, on the one hand, the Old Testament tells the Hebrews not to mix in with the pagans. Yet here in Leviticus, it says to welcome strangers sojourning through. All right, so these are two very different statements. What's the difference between the two?
Good question, Esther. And the idea here is that they were not supposed to knowingly mix and intermarry with the Canaanites for example, because the Canaanites were practicing all kinds of idolatry, witchcraft, and immorality. And the Israelites, in marrying into that, would have learnt their ways and would have been compromised. But of course, they had no control over people from other nations or tribes who wanted to pass through, so they were to treat strangers decently, not take advantage of them. And God reminds the Israelites, doesn't he? You know very well exactly what it's like to be a foreigner, because that's what you were in Egypt. So don't now discriminate or mistreat anyone else just because of their origin. Today we have plenty of mass migration across the world, people from other lands coming long distances to settle in areas that are either safer or offer better opportunities. And, let's be honest, they're often perceived as a threat. And if we look, for example, at, let's say, the situation with the United Kingdom, the history of the UK from the Romans on and even before is one of constant migration. You go through the Vikings, the Saxons, the Normans, the Huguenots, and so on and so forth. It's always been the same. And often those who feel threatened are those who just a couple or three generations before themselves were immigrants. Funny thing, isn't it? And so we get threatened very quickly and we forget where we've come from very quickly. And that perception or misconception sadly leads to immigrants being oppressed and mistreated. They find jobs sometimes in communities that nobody else seemingly wants to do, but they benefit the entire community nonetheless, but still they're mistreated for it. What should we do? Well, we don't have much control, do we, over governmental policies regarding immigration, which ebb and flow and change after a number of years. But as Christians, or even just from a perspective of honouring fellow human beings, what should our attitude towards others be, regardless of who they are, where they come from? Well, love God first, of course, but then love our neighbour. How? As we would love ourselves. Love our neighbour as you would love yourself or look after yourself. Well, it's a brilliant thing to aspire to, and it's a lot easier for me to say than it is to do. It's hard to do.
John, as you're speaking, I think of another group of people who may at times feel relegated to the sidelines in our culture, and that very often are the elderly people. They don't feel respected in our culture.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's an interesting point, because in certain cultures, older people are incredibly revered and respected, and the wisdom and their experiences are sought after and passed down through generations. There are cultures like that. And interestingly, in those cultures, people live far longer, and those family ties are incredibly strong. But you're right, in plenty of cultures, it is sadly true that the elderly are almost the forgotten demographic. They're overlooked, and with that overlooking, a great deal of wisdom and knowledge is also overlooked and missed in the process. Now, an elderly person is not only created in God's image, but they are a source of rich, untapped wisdom and insight. And we know that one of the 10 Commandments is to honour your parents.
Now, this code of law here, John, talks about the cutting of your hair on the side of your head or around the corners of your head, or mixing different types of cloth. Look, to us on the surface, this may seem like a trivial thing to have to worry about, but let's get into why the Bible emphasizes this.
Well, cutting the hair or even cutting the body all had to do with pagan rituals. And the idea was that God's people were to be different than those Baal worshippers around them. And one of their practices was to cut the hair on the sides of their heads. Perhaps you may have seen an Orthodox Jew with long curls on the sides of their heads. Well, they do that as literal obedience to this commandment in Leviticus?
Well, here comes a highly contested topic. What about tattoos? Because that's mentioned here in the book of Leviticus.
Now then, you're keeping me on my toes today, Esther. Well, you know.
That's the aim.
I know. Well, look, verse 28 says they shouldn't have tattoos or cut their bodies because of the dead. And again, Baal worshippers would intentionally cut their bodies, make tattoos on their skin, and that was sometimes associated with the occult. Now, we are called to look after our bodies, aren't we, as temples of the Holy Spirit of God himself. But it's a different context very often why people choose to get tattoos in our day and age. And so I would say this is not a subject to get hung up on, because ultimately God knows what really matters. And what really matters is the position, the posture and belief of our heart and soul, and whether we trust God. Now, our bodies and all their markings are merely a tent. One day, our souls are going to leave this tent once and for all. So in many ways, we're temporary residents. And so I think it's something that I'm not going to make any call on. And I think it's not something to get hugely hung up on either.
I hear you. And you know what? I'm going to give an analogy or paint a picture, right? So let's say, for example, a Christian guy wants to preach the gospel to, say, a group of surfers or a rock band, or, people who I suppose some would say would have tattoos, right? And so he decides that he'd get a tattoo so that he can kind of fit in and witness to them. Would that be something wrong to do?
Again, it depends on the posture of his heart before God. And God gives wisdom to every single person who believes in his name. And so every single person is responsible for their closeness of relationship with God. And the closer you are to God, the closer you have a sense of his will and things that do or don't bring you peace. So it's not right for me to delve too deep into what is effectively a secondary issue. That's what we're talking about here. It's a secondary issue, and say, well, this is right or that is wrong. This is for a person to decide before God for themselves.
All right, well, that's brilliant. That's a really good answer, John. Well, the Bible also says here that one should not profane their daughter by making her a prostitute. Now, did this really happen amongst the people back then? Because it's kind of hard to fathom that a parent would do that to their daughter.
Yeah, it did happen. And yeah, it is hard to get your head around as well, isn't it? And, sometimes though, Esther, you'd have a family in dire economic strife. And so for economic reasons, they would do this as a last resort. It was actually common in old Canaan and in some countries where people would struggle to gather basic food supplies. And sadly, this practice is still in existence today. And so our world, with its human trafficking and its booming sex industry, is no different. And so we see what would be described, I guess, as regular prostitution, but also there's all sorts of different perversions and abuses that take place, even tragically the abuse of children and the kind of immorality in human trafficking that goes on today. Well, I guess, they may well make the Canaanites look like saints in comparison, but God knows. God knows his heart is torn by what he sees, but he knows. And one day there will be an accounting for this behavior. But sadly, the answer to the question is yes, it happened then, and sadly, it happens now too.
Well, the Bible certainly doesn't shy away from our human failings and our human sins. And I suppose another question here, John, deals with trying to contact spirits or the dead. How should we look at that?
I think we look at it as, really dangerous, dangerous territory. Any involvement with witchcraft or the occult is off limits. And I sort of check myself as I say that, because oftentimes when you say you don't do this, then there's something in human nature that says, well, I want to have a look, I want to have a go at that. There's an intrigue, there's a mystique with it. You know, and you can't stop people if they're intent on exploring this stuff, doing that. But let me do so with a word of insight. And what I'd say is, as really a preface to that, is when we start dabbling in the likes of seances, Ouija boards, other areas, similar areas, we are opening ourselves up to demonic activity. Now, many may be lured into those things out of curiosity, for the buzz of it. Might seem exotic, the paranormal, but many will have absolutely no idea what they are opening their soul and their spirit up to, what they are dealing with. You have no idea what you open yourself up to. And the sobering truth is that once that portal to the demonic is open in your heart, there is no controlling the horror, the fear, and the damage that it will potentially unleash, to the extent that some who go down this route get to the path where they've no idea what they're doing, who they are, or what's going on. And so it's hard to go back and close the portal. And so, you know, be very careful. In fact, avoid going down this route at all costs.
Well, those are some sobering words that I pray we would all take heed to. Thanks, John, for sharing that with us. And you know, friend, as you listen with us, please stay as John now summarizes what we've learned in the book of Leviticus.
Yeah, Leviticus then chapters 17 and 19. Pretty short summary today, Esther. Very short, in fact. It can be summed up in one sentence. And that sentence is, love God first, and then love your neighbor as yourself.
And I think that that's a very important way of closing off today's show, friend. Thank you for joining us. Next time, we continue our study in the book of Leviticus, and we hope you will join along. So I'm Esther for John and our team, saying until then, this is Mission 66.
As Mission 66 comes to a close, be sure to download your free study guide at mission66.org. Deepen your daily devotion with insights from each episode, and let John and Esther lead you through the scriptures. Get your study guide at mission66.org and be prepared for our next episode. There, you can also connect with us, ask questions, or donate to help Mission 66's worldwide outreach. Head to mission66.org. Mission 66 is made possible through Transworld Radio in partnership with Dr. Luis Sayao.